What's up, everybody? Welcome to Podcast Now, Back to the Past. I'm Alex, and in this video, I am proud to say I have finally beaten and played, I suppose, Sea of Stars, one of the standout games of 2023, and one that got so much love, so much praise, and I never doubted it. It came out of nowhere to me. I wasn't following it. I didn't know about the Kickstarter, and it's been around for a while, for several years. We've kind of known of this, and kind of going back and looking at things is like, oh man, it was there the whole time, right? Like, it always kind of had a small little group that was supporting it and really into it, and the game released just a few months back. Not too, we're not talking about like a January game here. The game came out and it did insanely well. Critically, it got high 80s on Metacritic. Scores don't really mean all that much to me, but it did get very high praise there. It was on Game Pass, it was on PlayStation Plus, and even though it was on both subscription services, it still managed to sell, I believe, 250,000 units very quickly. They said that was kind of their goal for like the entire year, and that was done in just like probably under a month. So this game did so well, and it came out at a bad time, like, for me. Like, there was just a lot of other games, and it did catch me by surprise. So while I was seeing the Game of the Year talk for this game, I was saying, well, I don't doubt it. And we're going to talk about it in this video. I really do love this game, and I can see why people said it, but I was like, I just can't do it right now. Even if it is a 20 or so hour thing, it doesn't take the most time in the world, but I just didn't have time to do it. Well, guess what? We don't really have a lot of games in December, in January, and I'm using this time the best I possibly can. I got a lot of games, including actually for this channel, that we're going to be going through that are much longer and kind of deeper. So I went back, I played Sea of Stars, I played on PlayStation for those that care, PlayStation Plus, but again, you can do it on Game Pass. And it is largely the game that I was hoping it would be. I can largely tell why it got consideration from people. Just word on the street, right? Game of the Year type contender. Even though it didn't make it on the Game Awards. Did it deserve it? I think in a lot of ways, yes. There's a couple things here and there that I'm not a fan of that we'll talk about in this video, but overwhelmingly, if you want my very quick thoughts of this game, it's awesome. It's a really fantastic game. I'm so glad I played it. And, if you've been waiting for me to tell you, obviously go out and get this game. But I also, I guess, want to thank you guys while we're here. I got a lot of requests from you once this game came out. One of the times that I saw it, or one of the main kind of aspects of this, was seeing it from you guys, specifically the community of podcasts now, saying, Alex, you gotta try it, this is up your alley. And it was retro kind of RPGs. It's not exactly my most played genre, but you know what? I'm always up for it. The Chrono Triggers of the world. Funny story, I've never actually played Chrono Trigger. I gotta do it, and we will do it for this channel, I promise you. But it didn't actually take much to get me into it. It didn't take long for me to kind of get used to the gameplay itself. Now I'll say this, okay? I wasn't playing it necessarily for the gameplay. So I did a cardinal sin here, okay? I turned on whatever amulet the thing was that makes it so that you regenerate health once you're done with battles. So did I take the easy way out? Yes. And that did take an okay amount of challenge out of the game, because I imagine if you can only get health when you rest, right? And obviously you can use like different things during battles and whatnot, but it changes, I assume, how you approach the fights in this game. And generally, I didn't have to worry about it too much. I kind of went all out. Any fight that I was in, I fought like it was the last fight of my life. I gave it my all, and then you get your health back. You don't get your kind of ability points back, but you do get your health back. So I do want to say that I am a filthy casual, and I did play this game with the intent of experiencing it, but I didn't want to be held back because, yeah, this is actually one of my weaker genres. I'm not good at this. I know it basically just takes a lot of grinding, right, to level up. I didn't really want to do that going in. Now, maybe I could go back, restart it, new game, and do it kind of all over, and maybe do it the right way. But we're not here to talk about what's the right and wrong way to play Sea of Stars. We're here to talk about the game itself. All right. I want to start, and this is actually pretty abnormal for me, I want to start with the music, because one of the things I don't do enough on this channel, I try to remind myself in every one of these videos, is, Alex, mention the soundtrack, mention the music, mention that kind of stuff, because I really don't. And I think the reason I don't is generally music in games is like pretty good. Pretty good. Like, it's actually maybe more underrated than like you would think. You could see, like, I've seen videos of like artists saying like, oh, that music came from a game. Well, gaming has like better music, I believe, than a lot of bands and performances that are going on. So I've always thought that, but for me to talk about it, it needs to be like outstanding. Life is Strange, Kingdom Hearts. These are games that transcend, and then they have soundtracks that are legendary. Alan Wake, right? This game, I think, deserves to be in my, mentions when I say what are some of the best sounding games, whether it's the soundtrack or just the literal sounds that are happening when you play this game. This game has it. Now, it needs to have it, right? Because there's one time there's like a voice, and it's a shout. And I won't spoil, what it is, other than saying that. They shout. One character shouts. And that's the only time. Beyond that, it is just noises. It is noises of attacks and defenses and just the reoccurring like beats going on in the background. But holy God, it is good. This is where, and I don't even remember, like, for the Game Awards, if it wasn't nominated for soundtrack or sound design, it absolutely deserves it, because it's the only thing it's got, and not in, like, a negative, like, it's designed to be more retro. I appreciate the heck out of that, and I think that really, like, helped the game, right, that it felt older, but also kind of had a lot of the improvements that people have wanted from some of these games. The way you fight in this game, I think, is really, really good, and if the game came out like in the late 90s, I don't know if it would have had that fighting style, right? It kind of needed to learn from other games. But when it comes to sound, the only thing it's got is it's music, the literal noises that will happen when you're battling and taking damage or giving damage, right? And it does it flawless. It's one of the best sounding games, period, this entire year. So I'm really happy to report that. Visually, same thing. Game looks stunning. It looks absolutely awesome. And it does it while largely relying just on the retro kind of style of it. Now, there's a couple times, but it's actually very short. And I actually started to like almost chuckle, because there is almost like hand-drawn cinematic. It looks like a little CG-like, right? Couple scenes. And the scenes are very short. Like, they could be 10, 15 seconds that you're seeing a different kind of style. And it's actually more of like the cover here, more of like what you see behind. And it only does that maybe 10 times, maybe a little bit less, and every time, though, it looks really good. So visually, it nails it. It looks new. Like, it's got a new kind of feel to the visuals, where, like, I don't know if you'd be able to accomplish that 25 years ago, but obviously, huge inspiration and trying to make it feel like it could fit in that era, and I think it nailed that as well. The combat, I think it nailed that as well. The combat's really good, and it took me a while to fully understand it. Granted, again, I'm playing it with a little bit of like hand-holding going on, but I'll tell you, even with hand-holding, especially somebody that doesn't grind, doesn't take their time in that way. I take my time, but just not in the grinding sense. It is hard. Like, there are still some boss fights, tail end, last 30% of the game, that, like, I died multiple times. It took me a while, and it's just a learning process of understanding, okay, well, using the combos, like, figuring out what makes the most sense to use as combos, and that will build up your ultimate ability, and then using the ultimate ability strategically, using your abilities, and matching the characters. There's a lot of characters to play with, but you can only have 3 in your party, so figuring out the different attacks, and obviously the enemies will, they'll go in kind of a rotation, right? And they'll say, okay, you got 3 turns, and you have to hit them with like 5 different things. Well, which character makes the most sense to use to attack that enemy, and which combination of characters makes sense? But then after that, well, you also have to time things. Once you make that first hit, as soon as the hit lands, you tap it again, you'll get a double hit. If you don't do it, you're screwed, right? That didn't take long. Honestly, I kind of caught up on that very, very quickly. But just all those little things, blocking, not only do the enemies look cool, again, back to like the visual thing, all of the main characters look cool, all of the enemies look cool, and there is great diversity in them, but not just in how they look, not just in how they sound, but also in how they attack and defend, right? You're going to have to use different people for different enemies. You're also going to have to be paying attention to what they do, because one thing I found really cool is every new area, again, you're marveling at, oh my God, we're in a spaceship, we're here, we're there, we're in kind of an Atlantis kind of situation. You have that, But then when you face enemies, you say, oh God, like I'm gonna have to take these first couple hits. You have to, because you have to understand how the enemies attack you, so you know how to block, right? Now blocking obviously doesn't take up the full damage. You're still going to receive a little bit of damage, but it's very important to be able to block attacks. And I was kind of hit or miss. I mean, I would go on long strings of just nailing it, bam, bam, like over and over and over again, just nailing it. Sometimes there were some enemies that I could not get the timing. And, all this, I'm saying all this because it's amazing. Like, the combat's got such depth to it. And a lot of these games, a lot of these more retro role-playing games have that. But this game, I think, blends, again, kind of old and the positives of the old and where we've kind of gone with it. But then also, some of the mistakes that those games made where maybe the combat gets a little too boring. I really never found the combat to get stale. And I think it's because of, what I just said, the variety. I think when you're mixing different characters, and there's a pretty good progression almost, or let's say like rotation, right? Like the game moves at a pretty good pace, and you're either removing party members or you're adding party members, so you're always trying to like understand each other. You're always trying to figure out, okay, well, what makes this character tick, and should I even use them in battle? And sometimes you got to get really strategic where, hey, a character's getting low on health, well, let me kind of swap around and let me try to get like a group heal situation going on. And there's a lot to it, and not just with your guys, but then also, okay, every new enemy, it's not just like a cool animation. It's, well, I got to understand how this person attacks. What's their special move? If I let that countdown run out without knocking all of the blocks out, well, what's that going to do to me? You do that all the time. You do that for bosses, and bosses are obviously even more difficult, and they'll have super or special moves that really can destroy you. And again, I'm talking about all of that still with like a hand-holding situation, a crutch, right? I can't even imagine. Well, I can a little bit. If you had it where, okay, well, you don't get health back from one fight to the next. That makes it even more difficult. Again, I didn't really, need to do that. I'll say this, really, we've gone through all the elements of the game except for one, and it's story and characters. Okay, characters I think are awesome. I really like these guys. They're fun, and again, it's a testament to the game because you don't hear them. And I again, like a lot of games back in the day would do this, but, obviously modern day, last 10, 15 years, big games, even small games, there is a lot of voices, there's a lot of acting involved, and, it can be, I think, pretty difficult to get into a character if you don't hear them talk, if you're just reading over and over. Even a lot of Japanese-style games, the Kingdom Heartses of the world, or the Final Fantasies, or Yakuza, or whatever, there is a lot of reading involved, but there is a good amount, maybe 30%, maybe 40%, some games maybe 50, 60, 70%. You hear them. There's a lot of reading, but you can also hear them, so you can kind of put a personality. It's easier. I should say that. It's easier to put a personality to the character. If it's just reading, you can't really put it's harder to, I should say. I think they did it. Zale and Valerie, they're their own people, and they have their own kind of like just personality to them. Garl, all of the cast members that you eventually get, some of them much deeper, I would say, than others, or, I think the ones you get earlier on get more depth behind them just because you have more time. And that's the thing with all these RPGs, right? Now, some of the later characters, at least in other games, they can become more like fan favorites, and I can understand why. But generally, at least how I feel with these games, the characters that you're with for like 15 hours, which are some of the first maybe 3 or 4 characters in this game, right? You're with them so long, you experience them more, they have more of an integral plot to the story. Later characters, they help you out at the tail end, you need them, they join your party, but they haven't been with you as long. You've been with them 5 hours versus other characters that are like 15, right? So you're not really as invested. And, if there is a negative, I guess, with that situation, it would be that. Not all the characters are equal, but from allies to villains, this game is pretty darn good. Now, I will say one thing, or one weakness, is I would say the story. Now, the story, I think, actually starts incredibly good. The really building the world, I think they do a really good job at. And especially, I guess, right in the beginning, as the world starts to open up, and you don't have, like, the biggest quest in front of you. It's still more like, okay, we're going to take one kind of thing at a time. I would say this game loses a little bit of its footing when it expands the most, when it really wants to make like the entire world, kind of open up in its lore. When it does introduce like, well, not necessarily space travel, there is some space elements to it, but once you start to enter like these different, not universes, hard I guess to describe, once it really starts to open up in that way though, okay? I'm talking about really the last like 30-40% of the game, which I will say that is disappointing, and it's one of, if not the only disappointing thing in the game. I think it built up extremely well. I think the earlier characters were stronger. I think the earlier plot lines were stronger. And then once it really got to like the end goal of what you're doing, I think, and I would say even the ending almost completely falls apart. I won't spoil it entirely in case you haven't played it, but the last boss, like the true last boss, I guess separate from the true ending, was very not what I expected at all. In fact, I'd go so far to say the last hour of this game was severely, at least it felt like to me, severely rushed. Because it has, I think, a really good pace to it, and then it starts to get convoluted in the way that it has to open up a little bit more, and then it kind of just ends, and it kind of just jumps to the last really two big fights. And it depends on the true ending. I watched the true ending and know what happens in the true ending. Can't really talk about it because of certain other things. I'd also say, with a caveat, if you know the true ending, the caveat extra disappointment, I would say, is kind of stakes. The game, like a lot of these games, I'll say this without spoiling it. A lot of these games, I don't really feel like worried about my character's fates. Okay, wink, wink. And I felt that here, largely, not entirely, depending on the true ending. I never felt that anybody was in danger. I never felt like, and I felt like this game almost needed that gut punch. And again, like it kind of has it, but it really doesn't, depending. So it's hard to describe. But I really felt what this game was missing from that story element was a little bit less rushing at the very end. The final boss being a more on-rail shooter, let's say, that was not... I'm actually really good at those. And I took, like, one hit during that fight. I was really good. But it was so different than anything you've done. It was a completely different genre of game that it was like, why did you even do... And that was the final boss. So that really... I guess at this point, I'm saying it out loud. Like, that kind of ticks me off that they even decided to do that. But beyond that, beyond the last 10 minutes, the game is extremely, extremely good. Again, the only other thing would be I really felt it needed a little bit more consequence. There's a couple. I can think of one at the end, not in the true ending. There's a consequence with like a character that's been around for a while, and there's connections there. There is another one that has consequence, but beyond those two, not much. And for a 25-hour game, to kind of have two moments of consequence, not enough for me. So I would say, if we're being honest, this would be, I don't know for sure, but this is probably in my top 10 for games that I've played this year. I'm going to make a list, and I'm going to do it on the main channel on podcast now very, very soon. I'm going to rank every game that I played this year. I do imagine Sea of Stars is pretty darn high. I think the weaknesses I just said are the things that would stop it from being in like a top 5, top 3 situation. I think if I teared up in this game, if it had a moment that really made me, like, my jaw just freaking drop, I think this game would be a top 3 material. If the ending wasn't so jarringly different than the rest of the game, I think it would have been top 3 material. But so that's, hence like the title that you're probably seeing, in this video. It's very close to being a game of the year, but to me, it's not all the way. But it also, granted, it's also a massive surprise. Like, I didn't know about Alan Wake is my game of the year, right? And I'll just spoil that. Alan Wake 2 is my game of the year. I was hoping that the entire year. The entire January 1st, I was hoping that. Spider-Man, in advance. Starfield, all these big games. Baldur's Gate, even I kind of saw coming more than the average Joe, all right? This is a game that I had no idea it existed until it released. I didn't even know a week before it released. The day it released is when I found out about this game. And I felt like maybe I had seen it before in maybe like past gaming shows. I probably did. I probably did see a trailer, but I just didn't, it wasn't in my head. So in terms of like shock of or like most surprising game, this probably is the most surprising game. Because when you don't know about it at all, and then it turns out to be top 10, top 15 game of the year, and overall, very, extremely good with just a few setbacks. I mean, what more can you ask? And that's true. I really do actually believe that. What more can you ask for? Yeah, I can nitpick, a couple issues I have with the game, but overall, for a game I didn't have a clue existed, this is a phenomenal game that I didn't know I needed, but now I'm very happy that I managed to play it. So there you go. I really do appreciate you guys, asking me. I hope you liked it. I think this was one of my better reviews maybe I've ever done. I covered everything I wanted to. You let me know. You let me know what you think in the comments. Make sure, as always, you're subscribed to the channel, bell icon turned on, and I hope to see you all on the next one.